This film is a portrait of a man who has devoted his life to the flying of aircraft, as a United States Air Force pilot and as a captain of commercial jet airliners. It is Captain Field McConnell's personal story and his perspective on the events of September 11th. This isn't the full story of 9/11, but McConnell speaks about what he knows best: airplanes, their flight, and their control. His thoughts, ideas, and concepts are delivered spontaneously and unscripted. He is not a professional actor, nor a practiced press agent or politician. His concepts are illustrated with symbol and silent metaphor, so the lessons of that day may be simply understood and applied universally. In the year following the initial release of this film, McConnell's observations have been corroborated by a growing number of professional pilots. His principal ideas are supported by the data and research released by a growing number of physicists, engineers, intelligence analysts, and flight control workers, as well as an army of citizen witnesses. Not the least important of new discoveries, in January of 2008, World Trade Center dust sample analysis by 4 independent laboratories, including the U.S. Geological Survey, all confirm the presence of materials consistent with the use of controlled building demolition incendiaries and/or extreme high-temperature explosives. The creators of this film come from different backgrounds and different slices of the political pie, and we have drawn both at times similar and other times divergent conclusions about what these facts add up to. No matter, for all of us, 911 remains relevant and worthy of continued discussion.
"9/11 in 1 minute. 9/11's been solved. It was a double hijacking. Canadian intelligence services found out that Al-Qaeda was thinking of doing something on 9/11, so the Canadian intelligence services shared what they wished to with the Americans, but they took advantage of the Muslims, and the Canadians actually piggybacked on the attacks, and the Canadians, using high technology, allowed the Muslims to appear to physically take the aircraft, when actually the aircraft were in fact hijacked electronically through the QRS-11 gyroscope, which is a gyro chip, and some other technologies that could create false voices. So the media fairy tale of 9/11 is nowhere near the truth, and we would like to share the truth with you. And now in this movie, we believe we've told you the truth of 9/11.
Who is Captain Sherlock? This is Neil Slade, the director of this documentary. About a year and a half ago, I was introduced to the idea that the events that occurred on 9/11 were not told truthfully and complete, as reported by the general media, and that the overall public perception of the events were largely fictional and incomplete. Like most people presented with ideas outside the conventional wisdom of this event, I was at first totally skeptical. I then viewed a DVD lecture by physicist Dr. Stephen Jones of Brigham Young University, not exactly the hotbed of controversial and radical conspiracy theories. Nevertheless, in this methodical presentation, he clearly demonstrates the scientific evidence that all 3 World Trade Center buildings collapsed, not from plane impact and subsequent fire damage, but from a deliberate, pre-planned demolition that was timed to coincide exactly with the attacks that occurred on 9/11. Shortly after viewing Dr. Jones's DVD presentation, I contacted him personally, and because of my history and background in teaching and in writing about brain and behavior science, he personally invited me to join a private group known as Scholars for 911. Here we discussed controversies, theories, and details of 911 online on a private internet forum with members from all professional disciplines. It was on this forum that I met David Hawkins, whose own ideas about 911 brought much controversy to the group early on, but which I later found to be the most logical and well thought out. And in fact, he was the only person to address and then answer the riddles that to this day remain undiscovered by the majority of 911 sleuths. David's bio can be found on his website, hawkscafe.com. Additionally, I later arranged for him to do national public radio interviews after our meeting. But briefly here, let me say that he has a first-class honors degree in mechanical engineering, Cambridge University, a diploma in industrial management, Cambridge University, and received a foundation scholarship from Queen's College, Cambridge University for outstanding academic performance in applied mathematics and thermodynamics, which is the science of waste and chaos. This is just the tip of the iceberg regarding his qualifications and experience, which includes the use and placement of explosives, as well as the diagnosis of natural disasters, accidents, or violent crime, and the causes of such. I quickly became well acquainted with David, and after a period of months, finally came to understand the details of his analysis that provides key answers to the motives, money, and methods used on 911 outlined and presented in this film. His image remains absent from this film and even his website because David sees his contribution and role in solving this mystery, as Sherlock Holmes described himself, as a disembodied brain whose appearance and image is irrelevant and would only serve as a distraction from the complete events and tragedies of 911, for which popularly the so-called and identified Muslim hijackers have been given the complete blame, which is a scientific and physical impossibility. Several months ago, David met through the internet retired Air Force Top Gun pilot and large commercial jet pilot Field McConnell. After a short correspondence with David and careful review of his material, McConnell, with his 35 years of expert perspective as a pilot, felt that Hawkins had cracked the case, and that Hawkins' logic and reasoning were solid and sound. McConnell decided to quit his job as an airline pilot for both ethical and legal reasons, and in fact decided to take the matter to court to recover what would be his lost wages. Field states that he was forced into retirement by agencies and plane manufacturers that would not answer his simple questions regarding the safety of their current plane fleet. In March of 2007, McConnell came to my location to make our film together, and we then proceeded to film hour after hour of testimony, related images, and demonstration so that we could then share the information with the general public, who to this day remains largely in the dark concerning the facts about what really happened on 911 and how it happened. What you are seeing is selected portions from our 3 days of intense documentation and explanation, as well as illustrations of points that spanned several months. Captain Sherlock is not any one specific person, but the name we have chosen to give to the team of contributors who have collectively unraveled and exposed the unanswered crimes of 911. We do not all agree on every single point like any group of individuals with a common goal, but agree on the major points of unassailable integrity and physical reality. You too can be Captain Sherlock as you discover the truth and then reveal the truth to your friends, family, and coworkers.
Military area is to my left, but I don't have my uniform, so I think I'll stay in the civilian area if that's okay with you. Some of these people apparently had some money because there's some very big mausoleums here, if that's the correct one. Yeah. If you're afraid of security issues, you'll succumb to security issues. And I think the best defense is a overwhelming offense. So that's why I always send out email messages about the people I'm going to send email messages.
Right.
Before I, for instance, I recently sent an email to an FBI official, and before I sent the email to the FBI, I put it on the internet and posted it around the globe.
Left.
I think that honest people don't have to be afraid of anything, and therefore, if you're honest, you can go ahead and communicate openly. How do you feel about that, Mr. Anderson?
Just call me Deep Throat.
Okay, Linda. I don't know if the voice is going to. This reminds me a lot of a '65 Lotus.
Well, that's what it is.
Hence the similarity. Well, I don't see any funerals, so I guess we, rather than attend a funeral, we'll just drive around and look some more.
Yeah.
I'm more of a peaceful person, but sometimes I get put into positions where you can't be peaceful, and so then you either have to be a victim or a victor. And I've decided that being a victim is not a very good deal, so rather than start things, I'm a finisher. Like in baseball, they have finishers that somebody else pitches for 7.5 innings and the finisher goes in. So here it is, 5.5 years after 9/11, and I'm hoping to finish this off for the 3,000 victims. There's Morrison, but I don't think it's Jim Morrison. I see a cannon coming up.
Yeah.
A bunch of patriots. Patriots and patriots. Looks like Francis Brown Lowry, the person after which Lowry Air Force Base was probably named.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm thinking World War I because of the rifle and the ammo and the pot on his head. I think we need more patriots like this and less patriot acts. It's not an act, it's a way of life. My father was actually stationed at Lowry Air Force Base back in the late 40s after he came back from World War II, and he was flying B-25s here at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. So no matter where you go, you're connected to something, in this case, I have a familial relationship with this sergeant, I suppose. I don't see any insignia of rank, but he's carrying a rifle, and had he been an officer, he more likely would have had a pistol. So I wonder how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of patriots over the years have gone to their death so that our freedoms could be perpetuated. And it's those same freedoms that I find that are so much at risk now in 2007. I don't believe there's such thing as the two-party system anymore. In fact, in 1892, there was a banker's manifesto that was written where they sat at a table in Omaha, and European money sat there and tried to figure out how to enslave Americans. And three of the four tenets of the slavery were mortgages, two-party system, and poor public education. And I think they've achieved those three. And the fourth one has to do with the church, and frankly, I can't remember it. Not because I don't go to church, but just because I'm getting old enough to where I occasionally forget things. But anyone can find the text on the Banker's Manifesto of 1892, and it probably wouldn't be public knowledge if Congressman Lindbergh from Minnesota hadn't shared it with the public back around 1913, 1927, right in there.
Draw your picture and
Okay,
do stuff.
every one of these flights, there were 4 flights, and they all had a decoy airplane. In this case, the decoy was the real United 93. Right behind it was the same platform. In other words, it would have been a drone 757. The point being that everybody near the Capitol, if this hit the Capitol, they would have said, yep, we saw it. It was a United 757. And it would have had United paint. And it could have been a 757. It would have been an unmanned drone. And up here, watching this whole thing would be a little bitty white jet called a CL-144. No markings, pure white, very small. The CL-144 would be able to look down at the drone and the decoy and tell the people that were controlling them, which I allege is over here off the coast. There's 2 AWACS, okay, and the AWACS is called an E3A if it's an American, but these were NATO AWACS, and they're sitting out in international airspace controlling these two. Mm-hmm. In other words, they got radio waves going to this, radio waves going to that. But just from experience, I believe the purpose of the CL-144 is simply to be an eyeball. In other words, once the AWACS takes control of the decoy and the drone, perhaps the 144 will say, give me a left 30, in which case both the decoy and the drone turn left 30. Right. And then he says, give me a right 30. And they do a right 30, and then the eyeball guy would say, okay, you can take the decoy out over the water and destroy it, and you can send the drone to the target. Yeah. So you really, and when they talk about one airplane, you're really talking about 4. You got the decoy, the drone, the visual observer, and NATO AWACS. And there was a NATO AWACS off Washington, and there was one off New York City.
Well, couldn't they say that the NATO planes were involved in the
exercise? Yeah, they sure could.
As a
Boeing Aircraft has developed an uninterruptible autopilot, a tamper-proof autopilot system that allows the crew members or a agency such as the FAA or military to electronically control the airliner through the QRS-11 gyro chip, and the signals to the airliner are sent via satellite to the aircraft itself, which then will be landed safely at any destination selected by the controlling agency. June 1st and 2nd, 2001, Amalgam Virgo, U.S. military war game with Canadian intelligence. This is the dry run in the summer before 9/11 to show off and test the anti-hijack system being sold to the United States. Amalgam Virgo 01 was an air defense exercise created intellectually in Canada and foisted upon the U.S. Air Force and Department of Defense. It presumed that Osama bin Laden may use drones and cruise missiles to attack high-value targets in the United States of America, and it suggested that F-15s and F-16s from the U.S. Air Force would be the counters to those types of attacks. Slide 2 shows NORAD, which is North American Air Defense Fighters, and their exercise charter. Most of it's pretty standard, but what caught my attention on this page is that perceived is in big letters and a different color than the rest of it. And I think it's the intention of the three-card Monte operators behind Amalgam Virgo to put in our minds that the threats are Osama bin Laden, cruise missiles, and drones. The Canadian intelligence folks that put together this confusing exercise, Amalgam Virgo, intentionally inserted a gray area here. The gray area that was intentionally created in the planning for Amalgam Virgo would be used with great effect on the later Global Guardian of 9/11. It always introduced questions as to who is responsible for what and who is in charge of putting the response into motion. Designers, the perpetrators of 9/11, intentionally made it very easy for people to be confused, and this slide in front of you shows the confusion. There's multiple poor choices made, and no one is going to be responsible because the responsibility will be distributed across a lot of bad choices, and there will be nobody in charge.
That's a Canadian accent. The one over there is marked. It's got green around its neck.
It's got its own not territory, but landscape. And all of 9/11 is connected in the same way that all these valleys are connected.
Good evening. How may I help you? Okay. Oh, okay. Have you already gone up? Okay, Okay, well, if something bad happens, at least we have footage for your mom.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm on Lowry Air Force Base in Colorado, and I'm standing before a B-52 Stratofortress, and the bomber that predated the B-52 was the B-47 Stratojet. And my family history is that my father flew both the B-47s from 1951 to 1959, and then from 1963 through 1971, my father flew B-52s and KC-135 tankers. So I've been around Boeing aircraft since I was born, literally. I was born in 1949, and from 1951 until 1971, my father was involved in the deployment of Boeing assets, Boeing B-52s, Boeing KC-135 tankers, and the Boeing B-47 Stratojet before that. And so I am firsthand aware of much of the history of these bombers. The B-47, in fact, was droned in 1953. It was droned by Boeing aircraft, and that singular model was called the MB-47, and it was designed to fly without a human crew and to carry a hydrogen bomb over a great distance. That later was morphed into a QB-47, which was a drone B-47, and there was an incident in June of 1963 where a QB-47 being recovered at an field or an auxiliary airfield at Tyndall Air Force Base became uncontrollable in the final approach and actually crashed and caused several people to lose their lives. Those people were people that just happened to be driving by in their automobile at the wrong place at the wrong time. Recently in 2007 there's been some confusion of whether Boeing airplanes can be droned. And let me clear up the confusion. Going back to 54 years ago, yes, Boeing airplanes can be droned.
Okay, is that normal for a plane to have wrinkled skin like that?
Are you talking about the wrinkled skin below the Air Force and ahead of the wing?
Yes.
Yes, and that's caused by pressure changes as any pressurized airplane climbs in altitude. Here we're at 5,000 feet, and this Boeing B-52 behind me, if it were capable of taking off today and climbing to 37,000 feet, the size of the airplane would actually expand, and that sheet metal, that skin of the airplane would actually expand, and then when you come back down and there's more pressure on the airplane, it would compact. It's as if you had a can of empty Coke can or Pepsi can and you sort of crushed it. That's what we're looking at here, and that's from the changes in pressure over a great pressure schedule, as they call it, with airplanes such as this they have large cabins, or in this case bomb bays. They have to keep the airplane pressurized for the crew, and yet when you come back down, the size of the airplane changes, inducing wrinkles. I have to go on this static display, foot stomper, static display air show, but they wanted somebody with experience, so I got drafted, and I really didn't want to go. I'm busy enough, and I have a kid. But they asked me, they said, would you do our unit a favor, and would you take the F4 out there and so these kids don't go out and have a problem? Poor choice. Yeah, so I said, yeah, I'll go out there with the F4 and I'll do the air show, and you know, I'll sit there and answer questions. Well, when I arrived at Bozeman, if you want to go to a good air show, you need an Air Force advisor. So he was an active duty major who was getting out in 10 days to 2 weeks. And I'm talking to the boom operator, and I looked right at him like I'm looking at you, and I said, hey, boomer, I said, you look really old. Is it true that once the nose wheel comes off, if I light the burners and go right towards you? He said, no, that'd be great. And that's what we did. And then we sort of felt how there's no way to read how to do this. This was do it the first time. And the aircraft commander thought that the most he could handle was 250. Practice for about 5 minutes. But he, as the aircraft commander, he said, I can only give you about 250. Now, I know that you'll see he later went 350. But for the air refueling portion, you'll see us coming from. He didn't want. And this is, it's really remarkable that this video is on here, because I didn't know anybody was shooting video. And thinking back to when you're in active duty, you wouldn't dare do that, would you? No, nobody would. But we went out and got a video. I don't know. That's the funny thing. About 2 weeks after the air show, literally a brown envelope came. I'll walk out right now as soon as. Why don't we walk out together? I'll hand it to you. Or where can I find you? I'll go get it right now. Yeah, let me turn that off.
During the Amalgam Virgo War Game of June 1 and 2 of 2001, the routine called for all of U.S. airspace to come completely under the command of the former attacking Red Team. That is to say, Canadian intelligence and their Air Force, here shown as a CF-18. For 24 hours, the Canadian attackers would suddenly switch sides, and the U.S. Air Force would completely stand down and surrender protection of the U.S. to NATO and the Canadian air teams and their anti-hijacking formula. This scenario was replayed again with even greater complication and confusion during the multiple war games in play on the morning of 9/11, again with Canadian forces and NATO alone in controlling skies over America during the Global Guardian War Games of September 11th. It is known that on the morning of 9/11, as many as 20 independent war game scenarios were being played out, with the U.S. Air Force grounded during the Canadian Blue Air time. It was during this time that the Twin Towers were struck, the Pentagon was struck, and there was an attempt to fly a plane into the Capitol, aborted over the skies of Pennsylvania as Flight 93 was vaporized into nothingness that morning. The military and ultimately public perception has been prepared, conditioned, and neatly put into a virtual mind box
in which their attention and ability to effectively respond to any real threat was limited and restricted. The vision of threats to America and protection of its citizens was playing out like a card trick, where the participants were unknowingly being misdirected and controlled by the real operators behind the game.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm here for today. All I know is one thing, QRS-11 gyroscope.
Yeah.
And if the FBI or the ALPA or Boeing aircraft can tell me the QRS-11s are gone, then I fold my tent and go back into oblivion.
Come on, Dave, pick up the phone.
Please leave a short message. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
David, it's Neil. Call me back. I want to record you. I have some...
Hello, folks. If you're in the United States or Canada or anywhere in the world, you've heard a story about 9/11 that's been told by the major media, and frankly, that story is a dog. As you can see, right here, this looks like a 757 that hit the Pentagon. But is it or isn't? Let's investigate. Well, you may believe that because you've been told that, but which one's a 757? The one you've been told or the one that you couldn't see? And also, regardless of what hit the Pentagon, Wedge 1, Captain Gerald DeCanto's office, is it possible that this airplane could fly the maneuver that it was alleged to have been flying on that day? According to the official transcript of the incident, the three-dimensional flight path of the object that hit the Pentagon was somewhat like this. It flew over the Pentagon at 7,000 feet. Thereupon, it started a right wing down, very nose-low descent at 540 miles an hour, rolled out just inside the grassy knoll, descended to 15 feet, went between four wooden reels, and struck the Pentagon here. And that location on the Pentagon was the Naval Command Center, where Captain Gerald DeCanto was on the phone inside his office at the Naval Command Center when whatever the object was flew into his office and killed him. Gerald DeCanto was reaching for the phone to call one of his superiors requesting to engage the target that was attacking the Pentagon because they had broken the rules of engagement on that day. Gerald DeCanto was reaching for the phone to call one of his superiors requesting to engage the target that was attacking the Pentagon because they had broken the rules of engagement on that day. There were multiple air defense exercises going on, and the rules of engagement called for the limitation of the threatening aircraft, which would have been a member of the Red Air Team. When it got to 3 minutes of the Pentagon, it was supposed to abort its attack and knock off the fight. But that's not what happened on that day. When the flying object got to 25 miles, it pressed the attack. Captain Gerald DeCanto determined that there was a double cross going on, and Gerald DeCanto tried to reach somebody in authority to allow him to launch defensive weapons.
At the tone, please record your voice message. When you are finished recording, you may hang up or press pound for more options.
Field, it's Neil. Call me, okay? As soon as you've had your coffee and you're all up and awake and you fed your cows, call me up. I have a few questions I want to ask you. And check your email.
Left.
We're going to wrap it
Left
up.
Washington,
today.
D.C. and turned to the west.
So,
climbed to altitude in the 30,000 feet. It leveled off.
Bye.
Shortly after it leveled off, heading west towards California, a second airplane flew in right behind it in a formation such as this, within the range of 400 to 700 feet, so as to be invisible to radar. And the second airplane was a drone. There were no humans in it. There was not a cockpit crew, and there were certainly no passengers. And its purpose was to be right behind Flight 77 until such a time as the coordinated simultaneously attacks on the World Trade Center, the U.S. Capitol, and the Pentagon were assured. And the third airplane was a CL-144, which a lot of you in North America and the West recognize as an RJ built by CL or Bombardier. Notice it's white. There's no letters, there's no numbers, there's no identification, and there's no flag. And so what was this mysterious white airplane that was flying behind the drone? when the drone was flying behind Captain Chick Burlingame.
Hang on, my other phone's run off, so I think I know who that is.
It's probably David.
Hey, David? Yeah, in fact, I'm talking to him right now, so if you give us 3 to 5 minutes max, I'll be done with Neil and he'll be done with me, I think.
Yeah, and then I need to call David.
Okay, and he's going to call you right away.
Or tell David to call me.
Oh, I guess David? David?
So
911 was like a symphony. Someone wrote the script, the scenario and the plane, and it needed various experts and participants. They had to be coordinated, and the key problem for Al-Qaeda sitting in a cave in Afghanistan is coordination. It couldn't be done from Afghanistan. It had to be done domestically with Canada. A Canadian-controlled company had sabotage vulnerability testing contracts given it by the federal government at a number of key places that were targeted on 911. The construction office of the Department of the Interior that awarded the contracts, and the contracts including sabotage vulnerability testing on Wedge 1 of the Pentagon containing the U.S. Naval Command Center, a major strategic asset. So this company, controlled out of Canada, presumably by the Canadian Intelligence Services, was engaged in sabotage testing in a building in an area which was actually sabotaged. They also were awarded the contract for taking away the evidence and the debris.
Grab the money, grab the money, grab the money. Take it out of your hand, take the purse, take the purse.
They were very busy in New York too on that day. On the morning of 9/11, they were engaged in sabotage vulnerability testing in building number 7 of the World Trade Center complex. It was demolished at 5:20 p.m. on the afternoon of September the 11th.
Hi there. Field?
Neil, it's Field again.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have my ringer turned on, so I see this little flashing red light on the tip of my phone.
Okay.
I think we've got levels good. Anyway, last night was a revelation.
Good.
So here's the question. You say we know that a 757 did not hit the Pentagon.
Right.
Concisely, how do we know that it wasn't a 757?
Because the 757 could not have performed the maneuver immediately prior to the penetration of the Pentagon.
Okay, so it descends. Okay, let me stop you. It descends from 7,000 feet above the Pentagon, makes a very steep nosedive, and then levels out at 10 feet and goes for a pretty considerable distance at 10 or 15 feet above the ground.
Yeah, okay. Are you trying to record me now?
I am recording you, Field.
Okay, well, just tell me when to go. From my understanding of the trajectory of the aerospace vehicle that crossed the Pentagon at 7,000 feet, then commenced a rapidly descending right-hand turn, I believe the G-loading on the wings of the 757 would have been more than the airplane was capable of bearing.
Okay, stop right there. So you're saying that if a 757, and probably, if I know what you've said previously, even a 737, a smaller plane, if it had made that type of maneuver, it would have ripped the wings off the plane even before it got down to that Pentagon level, right?
It would have been either or. It would either rip the wings off the airplane or they wouldn't complete the turn and the descent before they hit the ground. In other words, the
that this is the flight trajectory from radar records and from not only radar, but people just there on the scene who watched the plane come in, right?
Right, and the official records that I would refer to are the Washington Center FAA air traffic control sequences of radar film.
I don't know this specific person, but do you recall a quote of somebody watching the radar of that vehicle coming in saying, "This has got to be a military vehicle"?
Yes, I can't put my finger on that, but I've heard that also that they being the approach controllers at the Washington Reagan Airport, as they watch this radar track proceed inbound towards the Pentagon, the controllers themselves were aware of two things: that whatever was doing this type of flying had to be a military, i.e. non-civilian aircraft, and secondly, a woman air traffic controller from Washington Approach Control was caught on tape on 9/11 stating that American 77 had been lost over the Atlantic 45 minutes prior to the events at the Pentagon.
Mark Bernbach, a Fox employee, is on the phone with us. Mark witnessed this from what we understand. Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
Hi, gentlemen. How you doing? Yeah, there was definitely a blue logo. It was like a circular logo on the front of the plane, definitely towards the front. It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the sides, and definitely very low. And I'm completely panicked. I'm freaking out. I cannot believe what I just saw.
We are all shaken by this. We are watching the video now back live, but the upper floors of the World Trade Center in Manhattan in flames now after apparently two large airplanes, we're talking about jetliners here, slammed into the sides right around 9 o'clock this morning. Mark, if what you say is true, those could be cargo planes or something like that. You said you didn't see any windows in the side?
I didn't see any windows in the sides. I saw the plane flying low. I was probably like a block away from the subway in Brooklyn, and that plane came down very low. And again, it was not a normal flight that I've ever seen at an airport. It was a plane that had a blue logo on the front, and it did not look like it belonged in this area.
That depends on the G loading of the flying platform, and when I say flying platform, that means, for the sake of this episode, I believe it was a Navy A-3 Sky Warrior, and I believe that from the dynamics and the trajectory, I believe it would have had a 4G turn, or perhaps a little more.
What does that mean, 4G? That if somebody weighs 200 pounds, they would suddenly weigh 800? They would weigh 4 times as much, 800 pounds?
Yes, a G is just like right now, wherever you're at in Omelet Town, you're under the influence of 1G.
Okay.
The pull of gravity. When you accelerate vertically in an airplane, or if you roll it over on its side and accelerate horizontally, but basically if you pull back on the stick or the yoke, you increase the effects of gravity, and airplanes such as the A-3 could probably take about 4 more G's. And keep in mind, it very possibly was reinforced at Fort Collins, where it could take more G's.
Okay.
But an airliner like a 757 or a 737 probably could only take about 2.5 G's. And if it was being flown by technology,
if they tried to fly more than 2 G's, the plane would just fall apart, wouldn't it?
yes, the wings would be stressed to the point of fracture.
Okay, gotcha. All right, but I'm asking again about would a pilot flying at, you said 4 G's, heading virtually straight for the ground, would this pilot be able to, if there was a pilot on that plane, are they likely to actually even remain conscious?
If there was an inexperienced pilot trying to fly the trajectory of the flying object that did in fact hit the Pentagon, if that was an inexperienced pilot, the 4G G-loading of the maneuver would cause him to be spatially disoriented, and there's no way in the world that a low-time pilot flying an airplane he has no experience in could do a 4G turn for 270 degrees and then roll out 15 or 10 feet above the ground and maintain a constant altitude for the length of a football field as it flies into a building.
And not to mention that the target is the office that's controlling our side of the war games that morning.
Right.
Yeah, this is beyond even the remotest bit of credibility.
It's technologically impossible with a human pilot.
Yeah, okay.
Even an experienced 757 pilot, if there's a 757 pilot out there somewhere that you could find rather than the random one that just happened to have that flight that day, or the Muslim who allegedly took the airplane over, no pilots, whether they're American, United, Delta, no U.S. airline pilot would have experience flying 540 knots below 10,000 feet because it's illegal to do so.
Yeah.
That's not to say that they couldn't knowingly and willfully break the law and fly 540 knots at 10 to 15 feet, but they'd have no experience in having done that, and so they could not have displayed the level of precision that was displayed on 9/11 when the flying object went squarely through the window of the Naval Command Center. That had to be technology flying the flying object, and it's my opinion that the flying object was a privately owned A-3 Sky Warrior.
I previously commented that when you're trying to solve a mystery, whether you're Sherlock Holmes or a pilot, a good place to start is to take the official story and eliminate anything that's impossible. The QRS-11 gyro chip was built to be installed in Maverick missiles, which could certainly do this. Boom. And there's your answer. It was not a transport category airplane. It was certainly not American 77. And if any pilot out there could fly this platform in a transport, I'd sure like to shake your hands and go for a ride.
The final moments of Flight 93 are nowhere near what was reported both by the media and by Hollywood. The final moments of Flight 93, as observed by numerous eyewitnesses, included the 757 flying perfectly inverted, straight and level, at treetop level, which is impossible due to the wing loading and the negative G loading of Flight 93, a 757. But more startling is what the eyewitnesses also observed. Flying very close to the inverted Flight 93 was a small white jet with upturned winglets and 2 rear-mounted engines that looked military. There was, other than the white paint, there was no markings, there was no flag, there was no company name. And shortly after the inverted 757 passed by Susan M. and the gentleman farmer, they heard a loud explosion, and the 757, which was vaporized at treetop level, left an 8-mile debris field, including one engine at one end of the debris field and a small circular hole at the other end.
How big was this hole in the ground?
You know, how big was it? I don't even remember.
Now, do you recall any big parts of the plane, like wings, fuselage? Did they recover any big pieces of that plane?
I can give you something good for tape there.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Of course I'm ready.
After studying the final moments of Flight 93 for 5.5 years, my only knowledge of any remnant that's identifiable is one engine that was left at one end of the 8-mile debris field. My only knowledge of any remnant that's identifiable is one engine that was left at one end of the 8-mile debris field.
Planes, and I think in every case the plane essentially vaporized.
That's right.
In every case there were no bodies, there were no seats, there were no big pieces of planes. To me, I draw the analogy between a firecracker. What would cause these planes to act more like firecrackers as opposed to a regular jet? What would allow these planes to vaporize either on impact or at a chosen time, such as Flight 93 would have done?
Pre-placed explosives that appear to be insulation. So what I'm suggesting is that well-intentioned technicians at aircraft modification factories, thinking they're sticking insulation in, either sound absorbing or vibrational insulation or thermal insulation, these well-meaning technicians could in fact be installing sheets of explosives, and there's pictures of that on the web at Hawks Cafe.
Solid rocket looks and behaves exactly like insulation until it's ignited at this tremendous
5,800 degrees.
Yeah, in other words, you could crash a plane into a building,
right,
and it still wouldn't ignite this solid rocket fuel to explode, but you could ignite it with a separate a separate ignition source, at which point then the solid rocket fuel installed as retrofitted insulation would then ignite.
That's right.
And what this brings to mind is the footage that I got from Dylan Avery, which shows this flash occurring as the second plane hits the Twin Towers.
Right.
You see the secondary flash like a missile or something, that's happening as the plane is entering the building.
Right.
It's almost like a missile is being fired into the building that will then ignite some other ignition source. We are conjecturing that will then ignite this retrofitted solid rocket fuel insulation, and cause the kind of explosion that we see on rocket liftoffs when solid rocket fuel explodes. Well, okay, hear about the fireball. We see the planes go into the building and there's this big... would a jet, even when it was filled with rocket fuel, going into a building, would you expect to see that kind of fireball from jet fuel alone in that type of situation?
No. Jet fuel has a very high flash point, and so just like diesel fuel on the over-the-road truckers, they can get in terrible collisions, and yet they generally don't catch on fire. And the same is true of jet fuel because of the nature of the mission, which is to haul people safely in steel or aluminum enclosures flying 500 miles an hour. The fuel has to be very stable, and being very flammable would be a hazard, so it's as inflammable as it can be made.
Jet fuel and kerosene are virtually the same thing, right?
Yes, jet fuel and kerosene.
Right, so kerosene and jet fuel, they don't cause this fireball like gasoline would.
No, it wouldn't.
You got to have something else igniting something else to make that big, showy movie fireball, right?
That's what I would suggest. You'd need an ignition source.
If you look closely, you'll notice that the shadow of the plane meets the building after the flash occurs. This means that the flash is not the fuselage colliding with the building, but rather a separate event. Not to mention that the flash is twice as wide as the fuselage itself. Within minutes of the attack, news teams from all over the city had their cameras trained on the World Trade Center. Therefore, The second impact was covered by almost every conceivable angle. This footage was shot by CNN. On the underside of the fuselage, an extra piece of equipment is visible. When questioned about this, Boeing representatives refused to discuss it. This is what the underside of a Boeing 767 should look like. The following footage is taken from the documentary Why the Towers Fell. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bring it back. Did you catch that? A missile is fired seconds before impact. Skeptics claim that the flash is the fuselage colliding with the building. If that were the case, it would look like this. Flash is also present in footage taken by Evan Fairbanks, Jennifer Spell, and CNN. Al-Qaeda certainly couldn't have added this equipment at Logan International Airport. And even if they did, the flight crew would have noticed it. So where did this plane come from?
I would just like to introduce the terminology of the Common Operational Picture. Okay, initials are COP or COP, and the Common Operational Picture is a term that the military uses.
Okay.
That if you're going to carry out a tactical exercise or a major battlefield campaign, your commanders have to have the Common Operational Picture, which is what all the assets and all the enemy locations and all your special weapons and tactic teams are doing. They have to have it to execute the mission successfully. They have to have access to the Common Operational Picture. The Common Operational Picture is assembled by having on-scene commanders. You've talked about the small white jet. That is an on-scene commander. The trailer outside the Pentagon looks to be like another on-scene commander. The Boeing AWACS NATO system with the rotating dome is another one. We think there were some ships offshore that were also gathering information and sending it via satellite to a command post, probably in Canada. And a virtual war room is a space in cyberspace, if you will, and it might be a room, but it's more likely just to be a computer. And there is a group of people looking at the computer, and on that computer is developed a common operational picture which identifies all the assets of the red team and all the positions of the blue team and whether or not the blue team is vulnerable. So the perpetrators of 9/11 would have been the people who had access to the common operational picture for the war games.
judged to be Flight 175 at 1,000 feet, 350 knots, just struck the second tower where the black smoke from the inefficient fire in the first tower is still visible. Here it is again, striking a second time. This time we can see at the end of the red arrow a small white jet, perhaps a CL-604. The third time it strikes, and this time the small white jet is more plainly visible, and it appears to be in a left-hand, shallow climbing left-hand turn. And from the next couple of pictures, we will see some shadows. There they are. There's a shadow amidships on the right side of the fuselage and a shadow at the tail, and that's created because it's in a left-hand turn, and the sunlight is no longer reflecting off the side of the airplane. It's being shadowed by the upraised wing. Once again, the variant of the 767 has struck the building. We know from scientific research and knowledge that the jet fuel, if it was mixed properly with oxygen or air, it would not have that black smoke. The black smoke is indicative of a fairly cool fire that's inefficiently burning the jet fuel, which really throws a lot of doubt onto the official story that the fuel was so intense that it melted the steel structures that held up the 1,365-foot average twin towers.
I'm more of a peaceful person, but sometimes I get put into positions where you can't be peaceful, and so then you either have to be a victim or a victor. And I've decided that being a victim is not a very good deal, so rather than start things, I'm a finisher. Like in baseball, they have finishers that somebody else pitches for 7.5 innings and the finisher goes in. So here it is, 5.5 years after 9/11, and I'm hoping to finish this off for the 3,000 victims.
Paraphrase of a great French journalist, there is nothing more powerful than a truth whose time has come.